And we're back. So moving into the next section of attitudes and emotions at work, which is this idea of state and trait emotions. And I have talked about this before as well. This not necessarily with emotions, but with the state and trait, I've kind of touched on it. And I'm going to kind of explain in depth what that means. So a trait is kind of considered a disposition. So when it comes to affect, and we're talking about emotions, this means things that tend to be how you feel broadly all the time. Your disposition towards certain types of affect, and in psychology, we usually mean positive or negative affect. So basically, to be very clear, it means traits which are individual difference characteristics. Remember from our early on in this semester, we talked about individual differences, meaning things that you kind of consider like almost personality traits. Personality is a form of individual difference. It's something that's stable across time and context. So if you're someone who has a disposition or a trait towards something, it's going to be true wherever you are. Remember that, everything we do in psychology is an interaction between individual and situation. But this is talking about things that are more on the individual side where it's just going to be how you are, regardless of where you are or what you're doing. So they, states, when you compare them to traits, are things that occur differently across time and context. So it's a lot like how the names suggest, right? So you have your traits, these are personality traits, things that are true of you, and you have states, it's just a state of mind that you're in for a brief period of time based on how you're feeling in that moment because of some situation. So those are more the emotions and the moods, whereas traits are longer lasting and can be more tied to personality. Yeah, and we all have both. So even if you're someone who is a trait of positive affect and tends to be a happy person, like Riley is in Inside Out, you probably will still experience states that are different depending on, context, especially a really, really strong context. So again, we're an interaction of both, but they, one kind of more is on the person side and one is more on the situation. One interesting connection to make is that counterproductive work behavior, those things like theft or bullying or just acting in a negative way at work towards others or towards the organization, those things tend to result more from state conditions than trait conditions. So you could be someone who has a really high trait negative affect, you're just a negative and neurotic person, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to engage in more CWB as opposed to being in a negative state due to something that happened at work, which makes a lot of sense when we think back to what I told you guys about during the CWB lecture, that people, tend to do these things kind of as retaliation to things that have happened to them at work. So CWB comes a lot from your state rather than your trait, which is really great because that means that organizations can have a lot of control over them. Because states usually occur due to situations, organizations can't always control the traits of their employees, but they can control the states that they're in by making the organization itself more pleasant in a variety of ways. So it's actually good for organizations. It's good news when things can be controlled by state because the organization is able to intervene and make those states more conducive to a positive working environment. So as I was talking about this idea of trait affect, these are the ones that people have that are lasting. And we have our great examples here of joy and sadness. Negative affectivity is a trait that individuals are prone to experience a diverse array of negative affective states, such as anxiety, depression, hostility, anger, and guilt. So honestly, most of the characters in Inside Out, except for Joy, would fall more into this negative affect side. Whereas joy is more positive affectivity, which is a trait in which individuals are prone to experience a diverse array of positive affective states, which means cheerfulness, enthusiasm, confidence, and energy. And that's joy for you. So, we mostly just refer to trait affect as either negative or positive. And just to abbreviate them, we often write NA and PA for negative affect and positive affect. So you'll actually see, if you're looking for like a measure of this, it's called PANAS, PANAS, positive affect, negative affect scale. So concerning job satisfaction, these affective states have a strong relationship with satisfaction with the work itself. So just kind of a more broad satisfaction of the type of work you're doing. People who have high positive affect will say they're more satisfied. People with high negative affect, on the other hand, will say they are less satisfied. Negative affect is also significantly related to decreased affective well-being and feelings of job stress. So that's important too. If you're someone who's prone to negative affect, that will make you feel worse in terms of your psychological and physical health, as well as your general stress. You'll have a lot more stress in your life. I'm going to get into that more even in the next lecture. Trait affect is more likely to affect moods rather than emotions. If you remember the definition of the two, that makes sense. Trait is long-lasting, and moods are longer-lasting than emotions. So longitudinal evidence has found that trait affect is relatively stable, as we talked about, and longitudinal meaning over long periods of time. There are lots of studies that find things such as trait affect in early adulthood, resulting in outcomes way later in life, like health. And that gets us into the next idea, genetics and job satisfaction. There is kind of a growing interest in all fields of psychology, but including, IO psych, of this idea of can we predict things from people from their genetics, from their genes and their heritage and those sorts of things. So one of the things I mentioned a second ago, there's one study that found that measuring someone's positive affect or negative affect in adolescence, like in their teens, early teens, can predict their job satisfaction as much as 50 years later. So that brings us to the classic psychology question of nature versus nurture. I encourage you guys to think about this a lot and how, you know, this could be either seen as a really bad thing for some of us or a good thing, depending on how our affect tends to be. But I definitely encourage you to, think more positively about this, even though there's definitely a tendency for those of us who are prone to negativity, like depression and anxiety and stress, to feel like, oh, does that mean I'm always going to feel this way? But truly, there is a state of mind that you can shift. And if you're able to do that, it can help you a lot way down the line. And I think that that's definitely something that comes from positive psychology, which is starting to seep into our IO field as well. And if you're interested in this topic, go ahead and look it up some more. Leave a discussion in our forum, and I'll be happy to read what you guys have to say. So the next thing I've mentioned before during the individual difference side as well, but it also relates a lot to affect and emotion, is this concept of core self-evaluations. So kind of like trait affect, it's a individual difference type of construct. And it specifically talks about the fundamental bottom line evaluation that you make about yourself. And of course that, as you would probably expect, just intuitively relates to your affect. So how you feel about yourself, just broadly, your core evaluation of who you are and how you feel about yourself. So basically it's an appraisal of your self-worth. And if it's positive, you're probably going to have more affect. And if it's negative, you're going to have more negative affect. And it's made up of 4 components. Self-esteem, which is just broadly view yourself positively. Generalized self-efficacy. Remember, we have discussed the difference between self-esteem and self-efficacy. Self-efficacy being your ability to perform successfully in life. And usually self-efficacy is targeted towards a specific thing or a specific trait or skill, but it can also be this generalized self-efficacy. Just, do I believe that I'm capable of being successful in many areas? An internal locus of control. I've addressed the topic of locus of control before, where you usually have a view of either internal versus external, meaning external, I think that all the things that happen to me in my life are out of my control, whereas an internal locus of control believes I can control the important life outcomes that I have. And people with internal locus of control generally have higher core self-evaluations and are able to kind of more take charge of their lives. And I discussed that a bit in class as well. And then finally, the fourth component is emotional stability, which is the opposite of neuroticism, one of the big 5 personality traits. And it's characterized by low to moderate variability in affective reactions. So just not being volatile, not having super strong emotional responses to things that, really get to you. So someone with a good high core self-evaluation would have high self-esteem, high generalized self-efficacy, an internal locus of control, and high emotional stability or low neuroticism. And this has been found to correlate highly with job satisfaction. So it's definitely an emotion relevant trait to look at. So the next type of affective state, or even outcome of affective state, I guess we could call it either one, it kind of has a little bit of both, is withdrawal. And to define withdrawal, we'll talk about kind of the history. It kind of came from counterproductive work behaviors and specific types of counterproductive work behaviors, which were originally all studied and identified as separate constructs. And they are separate constructs, but they're a part of this broader idea of withdrawal. And these constructs or facets of withdrawal include turnover, so quitting or leaving your organization, absenteeism, so not showing up, and tardiness, so being late. And they were all originally, as I mentioned, studied as different things. However, they were kind of put together and put into this category of withdrawal behaviors. So kind of like what sadness is doing over here. It's something that, is referring to kind of you withdrawal, you're pulling away from the organization of the job itself. And there are 2 types of withdrawal behaviors, and the first is work withdrawal. So it's your attempt to withdraw from the work itself, so not really wanting to do work. This can even include, sitting at your desk and wasting time, but mostly it's considered things like being late, leaving early, or being absent from work. So you're kind of leaving the work, but you're still maintaining ties with your organization itself and with your role or your job. But then there's also job withdrawal that represents your willingness to sever ties to an organization and the work role. And those are where you get into things like quitting, intentions to quit, turnover, retirement, etc. So just fully leaving the job. And usually there's a bit of a kind of a stepping stone, if you will. There's a progress or progression, as the progression hypothesis is named for, where you start with those actions of work withdrawal, not really doing your job, and then you move towards job withdrawal, which is we just wanted to completely quit, which makes sense. And these are kind of more results of negative affect. So, as negative affect builds, or negative responses to affective events, you'll experience work withdrawal, and then that will only increase the negativity, which will lead to job withdrawal, and so on. So this is why organizations want to do what they can to prevent those negative events and this progression from happening. All right, so that is it for this section, and the next one will be the last of attitudes and emotions. I'll see you in the next video.